evening, everyone. It is Susannah Birch here with you tonight, and I think it's just about time we got started. So we have a few people with us, and we also have a few who signed up who'll probably be watching this afterwards when they get emailed a copy of the webinar. So tonight we are covering the topic of Twitter. So thank you for joining us. I personally love Twitter, but I know not everyone has the same passion as I do. However, hopefully by the end of the night, you will have more of an idea about how Twitter works, what it can do for you, and the way you can craft tweets and connect with people who are your target demographic on Twitter. So here we go. So a little bit about me. I've been working in digital marketing since 2009. I originally got into it doing my own projects and blogging on different websites, on different social media platforms, growing communities. And then I started doing it for a day job, working with clients and agencies in startups and all different areas. So I really love digital. Now, I personally have over 50,000 followers on my personal Twitter because it is my happy place. It is my #1 favorite platform, even if I'm alone in that. So the good news is Twitter is achievable by anyone, but it does come down to whether it's suitable for you. And for me, I found it was the ideal spot to hang out, connect with people and learn new things. So back in, I believe it was around 2014, I realized that Twitter was the only platform I really didn't understand and I really didn't like. So I decided to set myself a goal. I'd quit all my other social media platforms and just spend a year on this platform I hated, working it out and getting good at it. So that's when I really dove in the deep end and really started to work on learning how the platform worked and how to utilize it. Well, the truth is it is completely different from all the other platforms you use day to day, which is why it is so difficult to get into. It is changing the way you understand conversation online, essentially. So I also am a digital generalist who loves traffic generation. What's traffic generation? I just love stats and numbers when they're increasing, whether it's people coming in from Google, Google My Business, on Facebook, growing groups, growing pages, anything to do with growing numbers in a digital business. That's what I love to do. I've also worked across a wide range of industries, and I have a background in journalism and marketing. Now, when I got online, I had to unlearn most of the things I learned in journalism because most of the things online are written in different ways. But the good news is studying journalism made it a lot easier for me to be good at Twitter, because Twitter is all about short, sharp, to the point tweets, which is probably why it's my happy place. It's the one place where I can get right to the point and really enjoy having an opinion or thoughts or data on such a platform. Anyway, next topic we're going to look at is what is Twitter. Now, I'm sure some of you do already use it, but we'll have varying degrees of knowledge in this group. So some people might have an account and they've never actually tweeted. Other people may tweet regularly, but want to know how to grow their Twitter following and their engagement further. So yes, just for the record, Twitter is not a bird watching site. And there are a lot of pieces of misinformation about what Twitter is. There are certain well-known politicians who probably added a little to the misinformation about the platform. And there's probably a few celebrities who haven't helped as well. And people do make a lot of assumptions about how controversial or political Twitter is, but that's certainly not all the platform is useful for. So a little bit about Twitter. Now, as you probably know, the character limit is 280 characters, which really isn't much. On average, that's 1 to 2 sentences. Now, honestly, that's pretty good after you've been on Twitter a while, because once upon a time it was 140 characters. So back in the day, you had to really figure out how to put all your thoughts into one tiny sentence, but 280 characters gives you just a little more breathing room and lets you be succinct in what you've got to say, while still giving you some space to say more than one thing in a tweet if you need to, which is great. Now, Another thing it's well known for is the fact that it's for online news and social networking. So there is definitely the social component, but when it comes to online news, that's probably one of the things it is best known for. Now, when it comes to online news, it's really, really useful whenever any ongoing trend or event is happening. And we'll go into why a little later in this webinar. Now, another thing it's well known for is microblogging and citizen journalism. Now, microblogging is a term essentially describing people who are sharing thoughts and opinions with the world, but in a very short form type of content. Now, traditionally, blogging might be 1,000 words per post, and it might cover a few topics, whereas microblogging is about cutting that down, cutting out the chatter and the complications, and just saying a single thought or idea, and doing that repeatedly and having conversations around those. And of course, citizen journalism is important. What that essentially means is people like you and I having personal thoughts and events and things happening around us that we then share with the Twitter sphere. So every day we see journalists sharing stories from a journalistic perspective, which sometimes can be informational and informative, but other times it's not giving us behind the scene real information about what's happening, just whoever is on the camera. So when it comes to citizen journalism, you've often got people live tweeting events. Now, what I mean by that is, for instance, during the bushfires or during the floods that we saw over the last few years, you saw a lot of people taking to Twitter with updates. Now, these updates were so beneficial because they were in real time. And that meant that people who needed updates about fires or floods in a certain area could find out when roads were blocked, what roads to avoid, where to get supplies, who needed help, information about the weather, all sorts of pieces of information. And this was all shared by everyday people like you and I. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that Twitter isn't just a way for celebrities and politicians to talk to people, although that is one key component of it. There are a lot of everyday users like you and I who use the platform regularly to connect on a wide range of topics. In fact, there are a lot of niches on Twitter that people don't even realize are a thing, but you'd be amazed how many great communities are on the site, and I'll go through a few of them shortly. So, why is Twitter so popular? Well, I probably shouldn't say so popular. It's not popular with everyone, but that's why it's really useful if you're the person who should be on it. Because unlike platforms like Facebook that try to be everything to everyone, Twitter is one of those platforms where you usually go there because you know what you want and you know what information and trends you're looking to engage with. So unlike Facebook, it's more than just a place to hang out with your friends. So it is more popular in, say, the US, but it is actually quite popular in Australia among key demographics and niches. So don't just assume that because we're in Australia, Twitter isn't a platform that might be useful to you. Now, the number one reason that Twitter is so popular is because it's got scan-friendly content. Now, what do I mean by scan-friendly? What that essentially boils down to is I can skim read and get lots of data in a short space of time and a short page size. So when you go over to Facebook and scroll through the newsfeed, you'll see that there might be posts, say 2 or 3 that you can see before you have to scroll. And you have to do a lot of scrolling to consume data because there's often big blocks of text, there's often big photos, there's a lot of content going on just for each single post. Twitter, on the other hand, because of its limitations on characters in a post, it essentially makes it very easy to gather a lot of data on a topic in a very short space of time and skim read through it. That, of course, is very, very useful when you're looking for a general overview of any type of trending event or any topic or anything that you want to know more about that the Twitter sphere is talking about. Now, another one that can be seen as a pro or con is the lack of privacy walls. Over on Facebook, you'll notice that there's friends. You can have friends who see your content while other people can't. There are Facebook groups where you can have a private group or a public group, and there are pages which can still be gated by country and other factors as well. So what this means is that not everyone can see everything on Facebook, and that's the way most social media apps work. However, on Twitter, the majority of people have their content set to public. You can turn your account onto private, but if you do that, you'll get a lot less engagement. So I'd recommend making sure your account is set to public unless you've got a very specific niche audience that you just want to chat with as a tiny community. So this lack of privacy walls just opens up the opportunities that you can have on Twitter to connect with other people, to connect with celebrities, influencers, politicians. There's so many conversations happening and you get to be a part of that. Now, another benefit of Twitter is that it's very time friendly. Now, what I mean by this is that when something's happening, you can get updates in real time a lot faster than most other platforms and a lot more syndicated into one topic. That's really useful because if you go over to Facebook, often you'll see a Facebook post that, well, it was made 3 days ago. And if that post 3 days ago was only important 3 days ago and it's out of date, well, you might have missed out on important news. So when it comes down to it, Twitter is a great place to find out what is happening right now in very easy ways. Another key part of Twitter that I personally love is the fact that you can have quick connections with people. People are a lot more open to conversations. Celebrities are a lot more willing to talk. Brands are a lot more willing to talk, chat, give feedback, provide answers. So it's a great place if you want to build connections and collaborations with other people in your industry or with the media and different niche groups and brands. So, Twitter, conversations. This is the key driving force of Twitter. Twitter isn't just about talking at people the way a Facebook page often is, but it's about starting conversations. Obviously, you can't talk a lot at people in 280 characters. So it's about crafting those tweets so people reply and you can reply to them. And there's always a lot of conversations happening on Twitter across a wide range of topics. So don't be afraid to engage with other people. Don't just think about what can I tell people from my Twitter account. Think about how you can engage with other people's tweets as well. And when you've got that under control, trust me, you'll have learnt half of Twitter. Now, when it comes to trends, it's very useful to go to Twitter and get data. They have a news feed where you can actually see what's going on in terms of the platform, what is trending, what is coming up as a news item or as a hashtag that people are highly engaged with, and what conversations are happening. This means that if there is a trend you're interested in having opinions on, you can join in that conversation either on other people's tweets, or of course you can also connect with them by doing your own tweets as well, having opinions and thoughts on whatever the subject trend is. So, controversy. We will touch on this a little simply because it is something that Twitter is known for. Because of its lack of privacy, anyone can have an opinion on anything and share it on Twitter. So I wouldn't be too worried. Most of the time, you'll be fine. However, I would put a little bit of caution into the platform, just like you would with anything you do that's public. You've seen things get controversial on other platforms as well, so it's probably not new to see how controversy happens. However, with Twitter, a lot of people there do have stronger opinions, so if you are going to be tweeting something controversial, I'd highly recommend that you give it some thought first and also be prepared for some backlash if a lot of people start talking about it. So as long as you're prepared, there's no reason you can't have controversy, but of course, make sure you think before you tweet. So who is using Twitter? Of course, this is very important to you as a Twitter user because if none of your target demographic is using Twitter or engaging there, Well, there's no point you actually being there. When it comes to social media, I generally recommend that people target the top 1 or 2 platforms where their target market hangs out. The reason for this is because otherwise you'll spread yourself too thin, and all the time and effort you're putting into other platforms, well, it's not going to pay off. So it's not worth your time when you could be investing your time better elsewhere. However, if your target demographic is on Twitter, then it's definitely worth making it one of your top 2 platforms that you regularly engage with. Otherwise, in some cases, it might be worth making it something you only engage with a couple of times a week. So here are some of the Twitter topics that are very commonly discussed on the platform. Now, what I mean by topics is topics that have communities where people have grown to engage and talk with each other about the Twitter platform. So there are all different niche communities, and this is not an exhaustive list at all. However, these are some of the ones that I've seen appear regularly on Twitter over the last must be nearly 8 years that I've been regularly using it. So startups are very common. Startups, small business, all those kind of topics are great because you can collaborate with people all around the world when it comes to building your business and engaging, especially in tech areas. Agriculture is surprisingly quite a big one as well. So there are a lot of Australian farmers who regularly use the platform to get updates, to share updates, to engage with other farmers and so on. Journalism is naturally one that's really well known. This is because, once again, it comes down to the time factor. Journalists don't have time to wade through tons of information, but Twitter allows people to engage with a particular topic and see everything happening in that topic in a really rapid way. So of course, journalists use it for research and often you find sources for their news articles and for TV because they go, oh, here's someone who is in the thick of this story. We're going to connect with them and make them part of the story we're talking about and reporting on. In fact, journalists are now, I believe, one of the most verified types of people on Twitter. What that essentially means is that they're the most people with the blue tick, which means there's more of them hanging out there than there are celebrities and so on the platform. Another big one, of course, is politics. There's a lot of politicians there. However, it can be very, very messy for politicians if they're not careful. There have been quite a few who've actually shut down their Twitter accounts because they've been a little tone deaf and they've talked at people and gotten quite a bit of negative feedback because they didn't always understand how the platform worked. Now, another one is writing. There are a large number of authors and writers on the platform, and there is a huge community around that and engaging, sharing. There's also regular events around the year where people can actually get their books picked up by publishers and literary agents. So that is quite a large area as well. There are also fan accounts. Probably not highly relevant to you as a business owner, but they're interesting to engage with occasionally, although I'd probably steer clear of them unless you understand what they're talking about. Whether it's something like a fan account for BTS, Taylor Swift, K-pop, there's all different fan accounts out there, and many of them spend a lot of time talking about the celebrities that they follow. Now, trending news, of course. There's lots and lots of trending news out there, and journalists are often involved in that, but there are everyday people who also have strong opinions or a lot of data and feedback to add to different trending news topics. What this means is there are people out there who aren't actually qualified professionals in their area, but are well known as experts simply because they track all the data around varying news topics, and in their niche, they are well known for knowing all about them. And another one is mental health. There's quite a large mental health community on Twitter. I know this because I am part of that mental health community and engage with people all around the world who talk a lot about mental health. Now, there are 2 other ones I haven't mentioned in here, but these fall into these niches as well often, and that's bloggers and podcasters, which I guess is a form of journalism today as well. However, they're great to engage with as well, and you can often find ways to collaborate with them because they're always looking to connect and converse with people who are in the same niche as them, and often interview them or collaborate with them on their websites and podcasts. So what types of people are using Twitter? So I could throw a lot of stats at you, but I thought I'd do a quick overview just so you can get a quick idea. You can drown in stats I've found if you've got too many. So 63.7% are male. So there is a larger male demographic than female. So if that is your demographic, this might be the place for you. This might boil down to the fact that a lot of them are, well, there's varying reasons, but a lot of them are more into politics, which seems often male-driven, or tech startups, which again is male-driven. However, there's also some amazing females on the platform in those areas as well. Now, 80% are affluent millennials. Why did I put that stat in? Well, I think it relates again to the next stat. 77% earn 75K plus. Now, those two stats tie into the fact that people on Twitter are generally more educated in some ways. Not always traditional education. They might have never gone to university or TAFE, but they're much more interested in educating themselves on different topics that might not be mainstream, whether it's politics or understanding agriculture, understanding tech. Often it's people who have stronger opinions, stronger backgrounds, and are more expert in their topics, as opposed to being on a platform just to socialize and be generally social with each other. So in some ways, it is much like LinkedIn that way. However, unlike LinkedIn, where everyone is more centered around business, there's also a lot of other demographics that aren't necessarily business related on Twitter. Now, the good news for you as a business owner is that 93% are open to brands getting involved if it's done in the right way. So this means that they're willing to talk with a brand, they're willing to chat, they're willing to engage with them, they're willing to follow them, which is highly important for you, of course, because that's what you want out of a social media platform, that engagement and conversation. And of course, that will help turn into customers as well. So tweeting, the number one thing you're probably going to be doing on Twitter after you've set up your account. How do you craft a great tweet? That is the question. Now, a great tweet. Well, there's so many different things that a great tweet can include, but here's a few things that I found work really well. Having an informed or well thought out opinion. Now, the reason for this is because people love retweeting things that they go, oh, that's a really good thought on that topic. I'd like to share it with my own audience. And retweeting is, of course, a way that people connect with other people through their networks. And having any kind of data about your industry or opinion is something that people really engage with. Same goes for valuable new data or insights. What I mean by this is if you've done some research or you've got some feedback or you've got an opinion about something trending that's relating to a topic you know about, it's worth doing a tweet about it because people really love to engage with that type of content. Another important tip is content that stands alone, and I'll talk a little more about that later. So essentially, content that doesn't require you to add extra pieces for people to see the whole picture and understand the entire narrative. Another one is tweets that tap into trends and news topics. Of course, that's very important because Twitter really does work around the latest thing going on. There are, of course, some niches where the news isn't always as relevant, but Twitter really pushes the latest things happening. So if you can tap into that as a business owner, it's well worth doing. Here we go. Being retweetable and making sure your content can stand alone. So here's a quick example I wrote. Say you're talking to someone on Twitter, having a conversation, and they've said something about how important trees are for our economy, for our infrastructure, for our cities. if you reply to them with, yes, I agree that trees are important, well, what are they going to say? Yeah, they might agree with you, but they're not going to retweet you. Why? Because you didn't add anything new to the conversation. So it's worth thinking about how you can craft even replies you make on Twitter so that you can actually be retweetable. So that whatever you're saying is a standalone tweet, even if people haven't seen the entire conversation. For instance, in the second tweet, I say that trees are important for long-term health and sustainability in cities because, and then you'd insert a relevant reason. This would be much easier to retweet and get engagement with simply because it's adding new content to the conversation, which means that more people will want to share it with their networks because it's something new. Another big thing on Twitter is humor. Now, what I mean by humor is something funny and engaging, and it doesn't always have to, well, be correct. Twitter is often about not quite correct and a bit funny as well, and it works really well for a lot of brands. As you can see here on the screen, there are some funny ones that have worked really well in the past. Weetabix, for instance, when they tweeted about this really disgusting concoction of baked beans and Weetabix over in the UK, they were even mentioned in the House of Commons, in Parliament, and they became a nationwide sensation just for this funny tweet. So not everything has to be humorous in a way that makes sense or people agree with. There's lots of different ways to do it, and Twitter has some great examples of brands doing this really well. Moon pie is one that's well known for being very humorous, although I'd say that they're a little like having a 12-year-old child on your Twitter account, but a really, really funny 12-year-old child. That said, they're highly engaging and get tons of conversations going, which in the end is one of the main things that we use Twitter for. However, there's lots of different brands, so have a look online after this webinar and maybe Google some of the top tweets that brands are doing, top humorous tweets, and you'll see the kind of content that is going really well on Twitter and you could engage with or create yourself. So what kind of tweets are people actually doing? Some of the most common Twitter topic tweets include humor, as we've covered, quotes. So quotes are easy to put into a tweet and they're a great way to engage people and they'll often retweet them. So it might be quotes that you yourself have said. Why can't you quote yourself? No one said you can't. So you could quote something you said during one of your own meetings or a talk or in a blog post and craft it into a short, quick quote tweet. So you can also quote other people in your industries, tag them. And again, this is a way of starting conversations because you're mentioning other people in your industry who might also engage back with your tweet because you mentioned them. Another big one is polls. As you saw in the previous slide, polls can work really well for engagement, particularly if they're funny. So look out, I think there's another poll in this webinar you can spot as well, although it didn't go quite as well for BMW who tweeted it. However, polls are great for engagement because number one thing people love to do on social media, what is it? Have opinions. So if you give people the chance to have opinions, they will definitely jump on board to do that. So another one, as I mentioned earlier, is conversations. Don't be afraid to start a conversation or even ask questions and get people to once again share their opinions with you. So it can be simple. You can ask simple questions about what do you like about X product, or how do you clean your house? I've seen a cleaner recently who tweeted asking what people thought about house cleaning and what they most hated cleaning in their house. And that got amazing engagement because everyone has something they hate to clean in their house. Of course, that's useful for the cleaner as long as they're the people who are in her town who can hire her to clean their house. Another one is opinions. Twitter loves an opinion, especially an informed one. So if you have an opinion on something trending or something relevant to your industry, don't be afraid to put it up on Twitter and start a conversation around it. Another one is videos. You can absolutely tweet videos. I wouldn't make every tweet a video. And of course, who wants to do that? Because making videos takes time and energy, doesn't it? However, it doesn't hurt to tweet videos now and then, and they're great to increase engagement with your content. And of course, data is great. So if you have some data around any research you've done or just feedback from customers, people love engaging with that because it gives them a better view of how the world's working, how your industry works within itself, and people on Twitter just love data. So how often should you tweet? Now, there are, of course, rules for other platforms like Instagram and Facebook around when you should be tweeting. Twitter is a little different. How many tweets per day should you do? 5 or more tweets per day lead to the greatest engagement and growth. Now, don't get scared. I wouldn't recommend that you go out every single day and tweet 5 times unless you're absolutely sure that Twitter is the #1 platform for you and every single person you want to engage with is on it. However, that said, it's worth logging in at least once a day to do some engagement and tweet once or twice if possible, but they don't have to be complex tweets. Unlike sites like Instagram or Facebook, you don't have to stress too much about tons of content and creating an image that goes with it or a video that engages people or a live. No, you don't have to stress that much about Twitter, which is the great news about it. You can write one sentence. You can just tweet, today we had a customer come into the shop and they said our coffee was the best they'd had in the whole town. There, that's the whole tweet. You can say something like that, or you can quote someone from your industry, or you can just throw up a quick thought or an inspiration or a tip. You don't have to overthink it the way you might on some platforms where you put a lot of time and energy into each post. That said, you can also think about ways that you can converse with other people's conversations. So that 5 tweets a day can also include looking at what other people are saying and replying to their conversations, adding your own thoughts, adding your own suggestions, just giving some feedback around that, which is a great way to engage. Now, time on Twitter. Is there an ideal time to tweet? Well, the good news is that Twitter actually is all over the place with timing. Yes, there are better times of day, but they really vary by industry and the type of person you're targeting, unlike some of the other platforms. So, although it is good to think about the time of day that your ideal client might be online, there's nothing saying that you can't tweet at other times. So, although I did tell you earlier on that Twitter is all about time-based content, so you can see things as they're tweeted. They also use algorithms so you can sort your tweets so you can see any that you've missed during the time you're offline. That's highly useful because if you engage with brands or people regularly and you haven't logged in for a couple of days, Twitter will go, here you go. Here's all the content that you might have wanted to engage with while you weren't here. So tweeting today, your followers might not see it till they log in next, but they will still see it as long as you're working on the engagement with them. So as you can see here, the average Twitter user spends 20 minutes per day on the platform. Now, it seems like a really small amount, but people remember they scan the content on Twitter, which means they might log in 5 to 10 times a day, and they might quickly scan through the content, get an update on what's happening in the Twitter world, look at the latest trends and what's trending on the platform, and then go take a break and spend half an hour on Facebook. What that means for you is that they're actually seeing content more often, just not in as larger groups of content as they would on other platforms, which isn't a bad thing. And it can be quite good because it gives them more opportunities to see your tweets. So, growing your following and your reach. Now, of course, everyone who has a Twitter account goes, great, I'm tweeting, but no one's actually reading anything I've got to say, which of course is important because otherwise it's kind of worthless. It's like putting a billboard in the middle of a desert. No one's going to see it. Now, I can't stress this enough. Conversations are amazing ways to engage. If you find other people in your industry who are talking about something that you know about, Don't be afraid to add your opinion. If you see a tweet that's got a lot of engagement, don't be afraid to hop on and add your own engagement. The reason for that is people on Twitter read all the comments a lot of the time and engage with them as well. So if they see that you've got an in-depth, insightful opinion on the original tweet, often they will follow along and engage with you as well, which of course is great for your following on the platform. Another one, and one that I find is quite underutilized, is Twitter lists. Now, there is a section of Twitter where you can see where the lists are and you can engage with them and create them. So it's simply a way of collecting together certain accounts that interest you on a certain topic and putting them into a different news feed. So for instance, here's an example of one of my accounts where I have collected a group of over 100 Australian farmers into a single list. Now, I only did this a few months ago simply because I work with a lot of clients whose target demographic is people in their agricultural industries. So in this case, I collected them together and just left the list there for me to use later. However, people on Twitter have discovered it because they were added to the list and they've been following along on the list. And many of the people who followed the list also followed me, even though I wasn't originally following them. So this is a great way to actually build up engagement for your own Twitter account. You can create lists around certain facets of your industry. It might be a list around other people who are in baking. It might be a list around people who sell dog food or dog collars. Anything like that, you can create a list for, and it's a great way also to engage because instead of just following at random, you have a very dedicated list where you go, today I just want to look at people tweeting about this single topic, and you can engage with them. So I'd highly recommend building out at least 2 or 3 lists because they are a great way to engage with people, and people also follow along on the list, and then they often follow along to see what you've got to say as well. So if you haven't already, work on those lists. Now, the last one is, of course, following other people who are relevant in your industry. Now, I wouldn't recommend going out and following people willy-nilly. It's going to be spammy, and Twitter does, of course, have limits on the type of following you do. I believe at the moment you can follow up to 500 people a day. However, I wouldn't go out and do that many follows a day. When it comes to the cap, I believe, I think you can follow 5,000 people, and then you can't follow any more until your number of followers reaches that, and 10%. So for instance, if you get 5,000 followers, you can only follow 5,500 because that's an extra 10%. So don't go all out there following all the people unless they're highly relevant to you. It's worth following along with the ones that you want to see regularly in your newsfeed. That said, many Twitter users do follow a lot of people. This is because not everyone tweets all the time and is not highly active. So if you're only following 100 people, for instance, you might only see 5 or 10 new tweets a day in your feed, and that's not many. And because there aren't things like pages or groups the way there are on Facebook to give you other content, having only 5 to 10 tweets per day to read is kind of boring, and it's not going to keep you engaging on the platform. So most people often follow hundreds of people or even thousands as they grow their reach because it gives them more insight into the niches and the topics and the trends that they really want to engage with. So wrapping it up, although we will take a quick look at the platform at the end, I'm going to give you a few things that you should think about from the perspective of what not to do and some things you should do. Some Twitter no-nos. As I mentioned earlier, here is a really fun tweet to look at in terms of a poll that kind of went wrong because BMW didn't really understand what its audience was going to click. You should always know the reactions you're going to get before you post. So if you're going to post something like this poll, it's worth thinking before you tweet. Now, number one thing that is a bugbear of regular Twitter users is syndicating tweets from other platforms. What I mean by this is when you post to Instagram and you tell it to automatically post to Twitter. when you post to Facebook and tell it to post to Twitter. Most people don't engage with these because often they're cut off in the feed, or you know that if you reply to them, people never check their Twitter account. Admit it, I'm sure someone here has an automated Twitter account and they only log in every few months and don't notice if they've got any engagement till then. So I'd recommend, if you're going to be serious about Twitter, don't syndicate your tweets from other platforms. Tweet natively on Twitter, please. Now, another big one is don't use too many hashtags. This isn't Instagram, people. So the reason for this is it just looks messy, and often not all of them are highly relevant. I'd recommend using 1 or 2 different hashtags maximum per tweet, because again, you don't have a lot of space and you want to use it wisely, and you want people to be thinking about your message, not all the blue clickable links that you can see in your feed. For instance, in this BMW Day tweet, they tweeted about hashtag World Environment Day. What that means is that they want to be seen for that topic, but they haven't filled in things like hashtag sustainability, hashtag environment, and so on. They're very clear that there's one thing they want to target with this tweet, and they're not going overboard with how they're tweeting. Another big one is don't be tone deaf, and make sure you know your audience, because there's often a lot of people who go on Twitter, just have these big opinions and then log off without actually engaging the conversation. So do spend some time looking at the kind of tweets in your feed, understanding how people think on Twitter, how they tweet, and what kind of conversations they want to engage in. Another big one is don't share too many links. People on Twitter want to be on Twitter. They don't want to go over to a website over here or a sales page over there. Although sometimes some links get huge engagement when they're relevant to your followers, a lot of the time it just annoys people because they don't want to be leaving the platform every 10 seconds to go read something elsewhere. Another big one is don't retweet other people. If I'm following you on Twitter, I want to know what you've got to say, and I followed you to find out your opinions and thoughts on a topic that I think we both share. So I wouldn't recommend retweeting all the time, because it's giving other people engagement but not helping your Twitter account at all, because you don't have opinions that make other people want to follow along with you. Some Twitter tips for things you can do. Here's a hot one. You can retweet your own tweets, which is very handy if you've got followers and you think some of them may not be logging in regularly, or you want to hit followers at another time of day because you've got ones that see a lot of things in their feed. You can go in, retweet your tweet, and then untweet it and do it all over again. Sometimes I'll go on my Twitter account and I'll tweet at 12 o'clock, and then I'll think, maybe there are people awake in the UK right now who follow me. So I'll retweet it later in the day as well at a relevant time to their time zone. So it's a great way to just boost your own tweets a little more in the feed. Don't engage if you can't take the heat. Again, Twitter is a place where people have strong opinions and they generally really know about their topics. So if they're having an opinion on something, generally it's because they're educated in it, or they've worked in it, or they're an expert of some sort. Even if they're not, they generally have strong feelings about the topic. So if you're unsure about how right you are, don't just throw opinions out into the Twitter sphere. I've seen it end badly a lot of times. Another one is use videos, GIFs, and text. So don't be afraid to mix them up. GIFs are also fun and engaging to reply to conversations with, just like you might on Facebook. So mix it up a little, see what works, and like every platform, play around and see how people engage and the things that get the highest engagement for your particular account and your industry and your niche. Now, another fun one to do is retweeting with comments to add your own voice to a conversation. Instead of just retweeting in a way which only shares someone else's opinion, you can retweet and do it with a comment where you can add your own thoughts. This is a fun way to engage your own followers while still showing something else you're interested in from someone else you follow. So if you do have any questions at the moment, you can pop them into the chat and we'll talk about them a little later. However, just before we end, I might pop over to Twitter and just give you some quick examples of trending topics. Here we go. Hopefully everyone can see this over on my screen. Now, I've just typed in hashtag #AusPoll. Now, what that stands for is Australian politics. That is a popular one, but it's also a topic which can get a little controversial. That said, you can type in all sorts of topics here in the search bar, and a little bit like Google, it'll really let you narrow things down. So say we wanted to find out about tweets that were about the environment, but only ones that talked about trees. We can type in environment and trees, and we can do a search for that topic. Now, this is great because it means that you're only engaging with content around that topic. You're not looking for EVs, you're not looking for solar, you're not looking for, say, sustainable footbaths. You're looking specifically for trees. So the great thing about Twitter is you can really narrow down tweets based on the type of content you're looking for. It's the same applies to people. You can also narrow down accounts that you want to engage with so that you can really talk to people about the trending topics that you're interested in, instead of just following people willy-nilly and having conversations with people who aren't really in the same niche as you. Now, just another quick one is over here on the left are lists. We did talk about lists earlier. So lists are a great way to engage with people, and don't be afraid to build up a list of people that you engage with across a wide range of different topics. You can have as many different lists as you want. For instance, I've got an Australian bloggers list, and Australian farmers, and some others. And you can also follow along on other people's lists and use them for engagement as well. Now, that is a quick overview of how Twitter works, and there are some other areas that you can go into. Now, I'm not going to go into all the different parts, but I will quickly show you the Explore tab. Now, the Explore tab is like the news feed of Twitter where everything's collated. What I mean by that is you can see all the things that you might be interested in that are trending right now. For instance, Channel 7 and health officials talking about Omicron again. These are all things that currently people are discussing. You can also see trending ones that might not be relevant to you as well. For instance, Australia Day is trending. And then there's other topics as well that you can look at. So sometimes it's worth going into this Explore tab because you can see if there's any relevant topics that you've got opinions and thoughts on that you could add to the conversation. So anyway, that is an overview of Twitter. I won't go too deep into this side of Twitter. However, I would recommend go and have a click around, go follow some people, go engage, go have some conversations on the platform. Just like any other platform, it does take time to figure out the kind of voice and the kind of content that people post. And although it's great to watch webinars to get an overview of how it works, the number one way that you can learn is, of course, going onto the platform and figuring out what buttons to click, where to go, what works, and what other people are saying and how they're using the platform. Anyway, thank you very much for coming along to the webinar. I will stick around after this to answer any questions. And if you do have any questions about Twitter or the webinar that you didn't get answered here, especially for those watching the recording, feel free to hit me up on Twitter because that's where I love to hang out. Otherwise, you can probably find me on most other social media platforms too because I am a little bit of an addict. Anyway, hope to see you on Twitter and hope everyone has a great night. And I will see you all later. Thank you.